New Year, everybody. I hope, if anybody's watching this, that you had a great holiday and all the good things. I have a couple more days before I go back to work, and so I'm chilling in our Love Makes a Family hoodie. And I thought I'd like to make a super quick video because I want to kind of lay out what our adoption process has looked like. So, first of all, am I covering? I don't know how to use this. First of all, I did a video with my husband about what led us to adoption and why we chose adoption. So I'm going to start our story today at the point where we have already decided to adopt and where we went from there. So after we had our meeting with our friend and we kind of had our concrete idea that this is what we were going to do, we originally decided, our initial decision was that we were going to actually adopt through the foster care system. And we had signed up with an agency to go to an orientation meeting to become foster parents. And we went to the orientation for this agency, and I was really overwhelmed by it. It gave me a lot of anxiety, and it was very scary to me. I do think that Kyle and I will foster at some point, but it didn't feel like that's what we were supposed to start with, but it seemed to fit because of the cost and because of the children in need was really that, you know, it was an easy thing to decide that that's what we were supposed to do. And so we went to this orientation, and afterwards it was a lot of anxiety on my end. Afterwards I had a lot of doubt. Kyle really didn't, but I had a lot of doubt about the foster care system, more than anything, more than the adoption process or anything like that. And after we went to that orientation is when we started telling our family that this is what we were doing. And a member of the family actually asked us, she was like, well, how many babies with Down syndrome do they see in the foster care system? And I said, you know, I don't actually know. I know that there are kids in the foster care system, but I also know that we wanted to adopt a baby first, only because I'm young. And so, you know, this had been our plan for like a couple of weeks at this point, and this question came up, and I called our agency and I asked, and I said, hey, how many babies with Down syndrome do you see go through the foster care system? And the lady that I was speaking to said, I'm going to be very candid with you. I've worked here for 4 years. I've never seen one. So that was a really, our first low point, I think, was learning that babies with Down syndrome weren't in the foster care system the way that we anticipated them being. And that's okay. That's a good thing. Ultimately, that's a good thing. But it was the first time in this whole process that me and Kyle's plan changed, and actually changed pretty suddenly. So it was kind of clear that we had to go the adoption route, the private infant adoption route. And the adoption route scared us simply because of cost. Simply because of that. It was far scarier to me to hear numbers that I was hearing, because there's such a wide range of cost in adoption, and I was getting nervous hearing some of these numbers and going like, well, I don't know that we can do that right now, but I really feel like this is what we're supposed to do. This is what we've decided we want to do. So I reached out to the National Down Syndrome Adoption Network. And the woman that we were talking to there was really wonderful, and I listened to the 1-hour webinar that is on the National Down Syndrome Adoption Network's website about things that you can do and different resources and ways to make adoption attainable for everybody, even if the finances do scare you, which is a very common thing. And so the first thing that she said to me was, she was like, just get a home study done. Just to get a home study done at all. And I said, okay, I can do that. That's totally fine. So I called back the agency that we went to for the foster care orientation, and I said, you know, we are changing routes. We are going through, we'd like to do the domestic infant adoption route. And so can I be connected to that program? And they said, sure. They connected me with that. And that's where we learned that we were not allowed to work with this agency. The reason why, I'll talk about later. It's not a bad reason. It wasn't like our fault. It was just, it's something frustrating that I've been experiencing a couple of times in this whole process, that there's something about me and Kyle that is tricky for some people, which is strange. So we were turned away from our first agency. And that was another really tricky part of this, was that we had been really thrown off by not being able to do the foster care system. And then this agency that we had met with, I won't say we connected with, and that's something else I'll talk about later. But we were turned away from them, and so we were at scratch. We went from like being at an orientation and telling people and getting excited about it and having a timeline kind of, to having nothing, to having literally no agency, to having no home study and really no idea what we were going to do. So after we pouted for a few days, I just Googled adoption agencies in our area, and it wasn't foster care, it was like adoption agencies, and a lot of them are the same, but I found 3 that I liked, that like on their website made me like I liked what they said, and one of them specifically said that they did special needs adoptions, and so that was a big pull for me. And so that Friday morning, I woke up and Kyle, and I had called a couple of them. I called a couple of these agencies. And the next morning, I woke up and Kyle was eating breakfast, looking at his computer, and he said, "What are you doing?" And he goes, "I'm looking at a couple of these agencies in the area to see if any of them ring a bell to me." And he goes, "There's this one that I'm liking." And I said, "Oh, I actually called them yesterday. And I left a message with them." And he said, "Oh, that's great. Okay, perfect." And as we're talking about that agency called me. And so we talked to this agency. We talked to the Director of Adoptions, I think is her title. And we felt so connected to her, and we felt so welcomed, and she was super excited, and in one phone conversation, we were further along in the adoption process than we had been yet, because she put us on her website to get started with the paperwork part. We set up an orientation meeting with her, and hung up, and we heard a cost that was considerably lower than what I had heard at any other agency. So before she even said any numbers about what the cost was going to be, I was already like, oh, I like this agency a lot. I like this woman a lot. I like how she cares about us a whole lot. Like, I think we should work with her. And then she said the cost of what the typical adoption costs at their agency. And I was like, yeah, we should do this. We should be working with her. So we met with her, and we were a little nervous because we had felt really like thrown around a little bit by our first agency, and not betrayed is not the right word, but a little nervous. And the meeting was so wonderful and so fun, and we left feeling so optimistic about this and so welcomed. And then she like started talking about some things that our first agency never mentioned to us. Even before we were turned away, I was, talked to them about being concerned about costs and stuff, and our second agency, our new agency, goes, "Well, here's how you..." No. And she basically was like, "You should never let the financial element of adoption scare you away from adoption, because here is..." And then she handed me a packet of resources to make adoption affordable, and different ways that you can do things that I never would have thought of. So we left, and we were given the daunting task of the paperwork. And in Michigan, there's kind of 2 phases of the paperwork. There's the initial application and then the formal application. And you can they're pretty quick to do. The initial application is. So we got that done pretty fast. And then we dove into the formal application. The formal application, I think, took Kyle and I 4 weeks, maybe 5 weeks to do. There were several times during the formal application that Kyle and I looked at each other and we were like, this is where people would give up. Like, this is the point. It's so much work. The paperwork was unbelievable. And everybody talks about the paperwork, so I thought that I was going to be comfortable going into it. It was crazy. It was just so much. I mean, and it was good, though. Ultimately, it was good because it forced me and Kyle to have conversations. I shouldn't say forced. It opened the door for me and Kyle to have these conversations that we had to, number one, because we had to answer about parenting and childhood and our thoughts on discipline and all that stuff. But it also was kind of intrusive at points and kind of scary. And a lot of people that I've talked to in the adoption community find that the paperwork part is less intrusive than the home visit part. And I really did not feel that way. So after the paperwork part came the home visit parts. And I think I'm going to do a whole different video talking about what our home visit looked like, because it was lovely. It was really honestly one of my favorite parts of the whole process. One of the scariest parts for me, but ended up being one of my favorite parts. But I'll give a quick overview. It was 2 visits with our caseworker, who was wonderful. And then after she was done, she started working on our home study. And after the home study was when, is where we're at now, where we are home study approved, technically active. We're not on the registry yet, but we legally can accept the placement of a child at this point. So that's kind of what it has looked like. It's been a lot of ups and downs. It's overall been very smooth, and not as bad as I thought it was going to be, like not as daunting as I honestly anticipated, mainly because we found the agency that worked with us. And I'm going to talk about our agency, I think, separately in a whole different video, because I think that's the key to having a good adoption process, is having an agency that you love, that loves you, and is less concerned about placing a child in your home and like finding you your child. And that's one of the differences I felt in the first agency versus the second, is the first agency kind of really just wanted a placement, because they were kind of, you know, they didn't know why we were limiting ourselves to just a child with Down syndrome, why this, why that. But the second agency was just like, all right, let's do it. That's great. So that's what ours has looked like. And I'm sure I've already forgotten parts, but again, that's why we're doing this, is so that I can start filming it and talking about it and remembering it for the future. I really have enjoyed learning about the adoption process. It's been really, really fun. And now that we're home study approved, I'm doing a ton of grant writing and fundraising, and I'd love to do a whole thing about talking about how to afford an adoption, because I think it should be accessible to everybody, and it is. So, yeah, I don't know what else to say. I think that's kind of it. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye!